Hi, everyone. Joining me today from Salisbury, England is Adam Taylor, Chief Innovation Officer at Aerated and founder of ARM Environments. Adam, welcome to Healthy Air.
Eric, thanks for having me on.
I want to share Adam's background briefly in order to provide context for our conversation. Since completion of his mechanical engineering degree, Adam has spent 17 years working in the HVAC industry. He spent his early career as a mechanical design engineer, designing domestic heating systems and then bespoke air distribution systems, working on high-profile projects such as venues for the 2012 London Olympic Games and the preservation of the Mary Rose Tudor warship. Since 2016, he began promoting adoption of the soon-to-be-released BB 101 guidelines. This was a revolutionary standard designed to improve air quality and thermal comfort in schools via implementation of demand-controlled heat recovery and natural ventilation solutions. In 2018, Adam began working internationally in the emerging field of indoor air cleaning technologies. Adam currently works with the team at Aerated, a UK-based indoor air quality certification, as well as running his own company, ARM Environments. All right, Adam, so let's dive into it. Tell us about your story of becoming an IAQ guru. How did you first get in the game? What were the formative experiences along the way? And how did you end up where you are today?
Well, I initially went and did a mechanical engineering degree because that's what you do if you don't know what you really want to do in life. I learned a lot there. Was terrified by thermodynamics and fluids and the refrigeration cycle. Never thought I'd get a job in it, but I actually took a job on the board at university, and that's how I got into the HVAC industry. So I spent about a decade in my first job, and then I went to do my CIBSE certification, which is the UK version of ASHRAE. And I realized that I hadn't learned anything in the last sort of 5 years. So I knew it was time to move on. And at the time there was a company called Breathing Buildings, which was making a lot of noise in the industry, really changing the way natural ventilation was perceived, doing a lot of work in schools. So I joined that company back in 2016. I started working with quite a lot of inspirational people and seeing how policy particularly drives change within the HVAC industry and the built environment. So I worked there for a number of years, and then there was a US company that was looking for someone to build a market for air cleaning technologies in Europe. So I thought I really need to push myself, get out of my comfort zone. This was shortly after I I'd had some kids, and been at home a lot. I was keen to travel, and that was a very, very different world. And I found out quite quickly that Europe wasn't really interested in air cleaning. There was a perception that the air was clean. There was no problem. So I thought to myself, how am I going to sell this solution to people? And that's when I really started delving into indoor air quality and seeing what the real problems that people had and what it was that can actually solve them. So there was a lot of reading and to gain exposure, trying to pick up a phone and sell in German when you're typically English and you only speak English is pretty tricky. So I had to become this fountain of knowledge to try and get people to come to me. So that's when I started learning.
Great. So just picking up on that. So you spent the early part of your career as a heating system design engineer, and then you moved into air distribution and thermal comfort systems. How did that progression and that set of experiences inform your perspective and approach to IAQ, which is kind of hitting on those systems, but coming at it from a bit of a different and broader angle?
Yeah. Source control is very important. If you want good indoor air quality, don't mess it up by when you create the room in the first place. But the other things that are going to affect indoor air quality, one of them is fitting air cleaners into that space, and you need to have a knowledge around other than just producing clean air, you have to do that quietly. And you need to do that energy efficiently, and you need to do that without blowing people's papers off of the desk. So having a more rounded knowledge of that is important. And when it comes to just trying to comply with guidance that says just put a HEPA filter in your HVAC system. You need to know that you can't just put an HEPA in your HVAC system in the vast majority of scenarios. So a lot of people, certainly at the moment, who are trying to assist with the pandemic, shall we say, they don't have that HVAC background. And people who are also quite heavily involved with policy, sometimes they don't as well. So I think you really need that knowledge to solve this problem.
Indoor air quality is a domain that lives at the intersection of environmental health and safety, and people coming from that kind of professional bent, and then engineering. And those are two very different and distinct disciplines and practice areas out in industry. In your experience, do engineers sufficiently appreciate the EHS considerations of IAQ and then vice versa?
I think from an environment point of view, when we're talking about energy, they do, as long as the price is right. People are only going to stick within compliance. There's very little desire to go beyond just complying, because if you spend a lot of time and energy, even if you love it, the way that construction goes these days, anything above compliance is always going to be value engineered out at the end. So unless you really got the ear of your client, or you've got a more traditional type of design, anything you're trying to do with regards to the environment, if it's not just the bare minimum, you're going to really, really struggle. In terms of health and safety, I think everything is very short term. There's a lot of consideration to things that will very quickly get you in trouble while you're still on the project, or you did it within the last 5 or 10 years. But anything that affects long-term health, I think, isn't really front and center when people are looking at buildings. Not at all. Mm-hmm. If you take particulate pollution, for example, it's the effects of that tend to be very long term. So most filters that are put in HVAC systems are there to protect the HVAC systems. They're not there because that causes problems. That's what you're going to get pulled up on, not because someone has a serious long term disease 10 years after they worked in that building.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so taking us up to the present day and what you're working on now, can tell us a little bit more about ARM environments and Aerated, and what is your role there, and what are those two organizations focused on?
Okay, no worries. So Aerated is an indoor air quality certification company. The company was conceived back in 2018 and launched pretty much just as the pandemic hit, which was a very difficult time to launch a standard, which was a lot of it is around health and well-being, but it's also about productivity and performance, and how does the air quality affect the way that people work in those environments. So very tricky when you're trying to tell people about the importance of that while there's a global pandemic raging. But the company has done very well. Got a lot of interest from the corporate real estate industry with Legal and General Investment Management, LGIM. They've invested big in certifying all of the buildings in their portfolio. So there's two sides to the Aerated offering. One of them is I'm just double checking that I'm not covering this a bit later on, but the certification involves going into a building once it's reached practical completion, and then monitoring the air quality within that space for a period of 3 weeks, and then giving that building a certification based on those results. The building is then annually recertified after that. The other side of the offering is what we call the Aerated Design and Operation certification. So there we take a building, preferably as early on in the design stage as possible, and we certify the design of the building based on what type of air quality, what standard of air quality it's likely to deliver, and that tends to be very much dependent on what part of the world it's in and what the outdoor air quality is like. Mm-hmm. So that's Aerated. So that's has been around half of my week working with those guys. And ARM environment. So ARM stands for Assess, Remediate, and Maintain. Previously Aspire IAQ. So initially we set out just offering air cleaning solutions and ventilation upgrades and things like that. But we're expanding the offering to focus more on the beginning of the journey, which is, have you actually got a problem in the first place, or how bad is your problem? So that's the assessment side of the business. So we take a look at what air quality problems the building has, what risks it has, and then choose appropriate remediation for that, rather than saying, this is the box we sell, you should buy that, because you can't just put forward one solution. It has to be relevant to what that particular space needs. Otherwise, the world is going to be left over with these white elephants sat there that people have spent money on, and they maybe they were appropriate at the time, but preferably long-term solutions. And the other aspect of it is, fingers crossed, if COVID does disappear or becomes less of an issue, maintaining those systems for the next pandemic and maintaining buildings environments generally going forward.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to dive into the pandemic shortly, but before we get there, let's talk about IAQ a bit more broadly. So you use the term total air quality in your work. How do you find total air quality, and how is it different from other terms that people are commonly using to describe indoor air quality?
So one of the things that's quite often said about air quality is how fresh is that air? What does that mean? Is it? And quite often, the freshness of an air is actually related to air changes. And that in turn is what concentration of CO2 have you got within the space. But in a lot of cases, bringing in outdoor air at a certain time is not going to make the situation better. If you consider a multitude of IEQ parameters, you might dilute the CO2 slightly. But if you're bringing in nitrogen dioxide and really high levels of PM10 and PM2.5, should you be doing that? Everything's thrown up in the air a bit with the pandemic, because the CO2 is quite closely related in a lot of environments to the number of people that are there. But we really need to look at a range of different pollutants within the space and really decide if bringing in air from outside is better, because we need to accept that it's not always fresh. Sometimes it's going to make the situation worse. So that's what we mean by total air quality.
Mm. The aerated standard has 5 parameters: temperature, relative humidity, PM2.5, TVOCs, and CO2. Why are these 5 parameters important? And then how does one actually achieve the aerated standard?
All right. So yeah, temperature first off. This is one quite close to my heart, because I find it very difficult to work in an office that everyone else seems absolutely fine with. It's always too hot for me. But yeah, there has to be a happy medium, and sort of 21, 22 degrees generally is the temperature that people perform best at. There's big drops off in performance and the way people feel just a few degrees above and below that. So that's one of the big important ones, and that's the one that your tenants and your occupiers of the building are going to be complaining about. Most other aspects of air quality, they won't really notice, but the temperature is very important. So if you're looking to take on a building, you need to know that it can maintain temperature within a tight tolerance. Next one being humidity. This has really come to the front during the pandemic. When we were talking about humidity pre-pandemic, we were talking about very dry air drying out skin and eyes, and very high humidity causing all kinds of things like mold to grow and to persist in their space. But right now, humidity is particularly important because as we release droplets as we speak into the space, if the air is particularly dry, those dry out to form small droplet nuclei, which then are the size where they are airborne, and they will hang around in the space for potentially hours. So having buildings that are very dry, which mostly occurs in winter, is a real problem. So that's probably the thing that people are most reluctant to remediate, because it's expensive, both CapEx and OpEx, to maintain humidity within a narrow band. But it is really important. Carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide at the concentrations we see in most buildings is not causing you long-term damage, but it is affecting how you perform. There's a statistic. I think it was 2,500 ppm of CO2 was the equivalent of having a couple of beers. So that gives you the sort of idea of the effect that it has on the brain. But there was a lot of studies, particularly coming out of Harvard, which I'm sure you're aware of, where the cognitive performance, even the difference between 1,000 and 600 ppm, was correlated with big differences in the way people perform. And it's, like I said, it's particularly important now when we're measuring CO2, because it's an indication of the number of people that are there. VOC, so TVOC is the measurement we look at, total volatile organic compounds. So a lot of these are released from building materials, carpets, paints, etc. The thing to remember about VOCs is they're not all really dangerous. So some of them you can be exposed to very high concentration of. They don't do a lot of damage. Some of them at very low concentrations, benzene, for example, carcinogenic, no safe level of that VOC. So very important to keep an eye on. A lot of that is best controlled by sorting out and using the appropriate materials when you're constructing the building. But keeping an eye on those TVOCs, make sure that people aren't using inappropriate cleaning materials in the building, and causing problems with that. And the final one we look at when we talk about an air score is the particulates. We talk about PM2.5 particularly. The smaller a particle is, the more damage it does generally to the body. The body's pretty good at removing large particles, either through the nose and the throat. But by the time you get down to PM2.5 and smaller, we go down deep into the lungs, into the blood, and then eventually into the brain. So, very important for long-term health. I think the larger particles might cause short-term respiratory problems, but the long-term ones are what come from those very fine particles. And in terms of gaining that certification, that is a measured certification. So we are deploying IAQ sensors within the space, and measuring that building for a period of time post completion, and then again we annually recertify that building to maintain its certified status.
Great. So there are a host of private indoor air quality standards, verifications, and certifications, both in Europe, in North America, globally. But by the same token, there's also a real deficit of public indoor air quality legislation, regulation, standards. Why, in your view, have governments been so slow and seemingly reluctant to act in this area, given its fundamental importance to public health?
Yeah, tricky one. I think in the UK, this BB101, which I was busy promoting about 5 years ago, that was fairly revolutionary, and that was driven by the science around the way people are affected by CO2 within a space. So BB101 was about thermal comfort, and it was about ventilation. So in the UK, our climate is so it's never very cold, it's never very hot, but within a classroom, when you've got 30 kids in there, then it can get really hot, even when we get a brief couple of glimpses of sunshine. So it was important to stop these buildings from overheating. But the other big aspect was most of them were just ventilated with opening windows. And people don't use windows as effectively as they should do. We don't have air conditioning in schools the majority of the time, maybe sort of the southeast London area, but these buildings need to be passively cooled overnight. So there was a lot of introduction of that to allow passive night cooling of those structures. So that was leading the way. We've actually got our Part F, which governs ventilation in all types of building. That's looking very promising. Previously, it was just about litres a second. Now they're actually considering other aspects of air quality as well, worrying about whether particulates are coming into the space, nitrogen dioxide, and different VOCs, the carcinogenic VOCs that come from vehicle fumes. But in terms of why it's so slow, it's expensive. It's expensive. It's cheap to keep your head in the sand. It's also very slow to put these changes into practice as well. And if something like this comes forward and we say, oh, it's very important to ventilate your building because it's very dangerous. You've said that about the new buildings being built, but what about the existing building stock? It really does open up a can of worms when you start to highlight these problems. And in terms of the pandemic, why have we spent so long ignoring the risk of airborne transmission? I mean, when London bus drivers were dying in quite large numbers, they're behind a plastic screen. Most of it's contactless. It's in the air. They're also sadly exposed to very high levels of air pollution as well, which seems to have worsened the effects of COVID. But it seemed very obvious that it was in the air. But when we're talking about washing your hands, we were all told to wash our hands and sing happy for the length of time it takes to sing happy birthday. That's not too scary. But when you start talking about something that's in the air, that's much more scary and panic inducing. You think it would be anyway, but I think by the time we actually heard that it was probably in the air, everyone is sick of the pandemic, but people didn't seem to be taking it as seriously as they should. But yeah, many factors as to why the legislation is so slow to come in. But I really think that it's going to come in fast now.
So in the current environment, a huge responsibility sits with employers and private entities to ensure that IAQ as it relates to health and safety is being maintained. Do you think this is a good thing? And do you think that employers and private entities, and this is obviously a big question, and so I have to get you to generalize, but do you think that employers and private entities are taking this seriously, or who is taking it seriously and who isn't?
I think the people who are taking it seriously are the people who can afford to take it seriously. A lot of the big names, the companies that are doing very well at the moment, they're doing a lot in their buildings. There's a very real risk that COVID becomes a disease of the poor. So people working in offices are able to go home, work from home, then they come back into their offices, which have been made COVID safe, COVID secure. Improvements have been made to those buildings. But the people who have to work in a food factory, which has got 90% recirculated air, they're working 4 foot from someone else within that space. That's what they have to do. And the people in these lower paid jobs are not being looked after because their industries do not have the money to do it. And people only comply. They will not do anything above compliance, particularly in those industries, because they don't have the money to. If chicken farmer A versus chicken farmer B, if chicken farmer A spends lots of money on protecting their staff, that's got to get paid for somehow. They don't buy their chicken, people lose their jobs. The money's not there. So it really has to come from the top. Otherwise people, if it's not a level playing field, people won't do it.
Okay. Well, let's now dive into the pandemic. We've already been hitting on it. But a year and a half plus into the COVID-19 experience, how prepared are we from an IAQ perspective to mitigate infection indoors? And have we made progress since the beginning of the pandemic in our preparedness? Give us a kind of state of play today.
I think if we assumed everyone did what they were told, and that didn't have a really, really big climate change problem looming as well, then I think if COVID was going to just be a quick flash in the pan and be done, I think we could probably deal with it, because we know what we can do to ventilate buildings, throw all the doors open, run the HVAC systems full whack, et cetera, et cetera. We can get by briefly, but there are no real tried and tested solutions that have been deployed and tested. So we just don't know where we are. There's a test that's just hit the headlines in the UK. So they are testing 30 schools. We were involved in this about 6 months ago, and they're testing 30 schools. So 10 schools are the control. 10 schools are testing standalone HEPA purifiers, and 10 schools are testing upper room UV systems. And it's in Bradford, which is in northern England. And in 18 months' time, then we will know. We will know the results of what technologies worked, whether the intervention, I think £7.5 million is what's being spent on that. But those results will not be out until then. And I don't think we will know what's really working until after the pandemic, because there's so much data to work through. I don't think we're there yet.
Okay, well, that may make the next question difficult to answer, but I guess, in kind of controlled environments and in other past peer-reviewed research, we do have some data points to understand how different remediations and strategies are working in terms of efficacy versus not. I agree with you that in the real world, we largely don't know. But so you're deep into a lot of these remediation solutions by the nature of your background and then your work today, where you're advising real world clients. So what is persuasive to you in terms of efficacy for remediations and strategies? What is not so much, or where there are open questions? And then how well do you think the real world, and let's take the real world as people who are actually practitioners, engineers, safety consultants, who are understanding what works, what doesn't, and then is advising real world clients, and ultimately, are we making the right decisions in our buildings about what the most effective, risk mitigants are for our offices, our schools, other types of everyday public environments?
Yeah, it's extremely difficult to test at the moment what is the most applicable solution for every given environment. I mean, if you take almost every air cleaning solution, it can be tested relatively easily in a lab. You take a HEPA purifier or a UV system, you measure the air, the amount of pathogen immediately before that filter, and immediately after, you can see the reduction. How that translates to a building is very difficult. How much do you know? How much of that pathogen has gone all the way through the HVAC system and then back into the space? What is the risk from recirculation? It's very tricky. They've just released some new guidance in the UK for hospitals specifically. It's called the CIBSE HTM, so it's HTM03. And in there, I was at the meeting. We were talking about new filtration grades, ultraviolet on coils, bipolar ionization, and this was back in 2019. The new guidance has come out, and there's no clean air technologies been included in there, and they've said there's no real point in putting very high grades of filtration on the air coming into the hospital, because the majority of the pollutants in the space originate in the space. It's not coming in from outside. It's from the people. So yeah, it's extremely difficult. I mean, dilution. dilution does work in all of the calculations. It shows reduction in the level of pollutants, but it's people are in a difficult position when they're deciding what to do in buildings, possibly relying on anecdotal evidence of something that has worked or something that's been tested in a lab. It is a real challenge for people to verify these solutions.
So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, just because ultimately people are being forced to make decisions about what do we do in our space, whether you're a school, an office, a plant, a hospital, and just interested in doing a quick lightning round of knowing the space types, the system types generally in different types of indoor environments, and then also the budget constraints that those types of clients are facing and the sophistication of the people running those facilities. Really interested to just hear your quick thoughts running through a few different types of built environments. So starting off with an office. If you were in a multi-tenant office building and you were responsible for health and safety in that space and people going back in, what do you think are a couple of things that people should be focused on for the office environment from a safety perspective?
From the safety perspective, yeah. I mean, good air changes through those spaces are very important, but also controlling the air direction or even knowing where the air is moving within that space. In an office, you've generally got fixed workstations. A traditional HVAC system, we are introducing air at high level all over the place, mixing that air within the space, and then maybe just returning it to a single point. Very overly simplistic ventilation systems. If we can control more closely where the air is coming into the space, where it's coming out of the space, people don't need to be breathing this mixed, half recycled air all the time. We should be able to, through the design of the buildings, deliver cleaner air to people if they are if they're a fixed workstation. There's a really interesting ventilation concept, which I believe comes out of Europe, which is personal ventilation. So there you've got a nozzle feeding you with the small amount of the very clean air that you need to breathe. Why treat the entire space when you can just bring air directly to the people who are in those fixed workstations? Doesn't work for a lot of environments, but from an energy point of view, I mean, there's a lot of material use involved in that, but to provide people with this perfect quality air in just the right amount that they need, I think that definitely warrants further investigation.
Okay, so moving on to a school or a primary or secondary school, what do you think moves the needle there?
We've lost our fixed workstations, definitely. We've got people moving in and around all the time. Again, here, learning, air changes, getting CO2 levels down in schools, I think is important for people's learning outcomes within those spaces, and also reducing levels of particulates within that space. So whether that is, like I said, if you just filter the air that's coming in, you're still getting particles released in the space. So secondary levels of particulate reduction, either local filter units or bipolar ionization, something to reduce those particles that are produced in the space as well.
Mm-hmm. Moving on to a hospital or a healthcare facility, but maybe not so much, given that some parts of a hospital and in terms of general built environments, their hospitals are probably best equipped to be able to combat airborne respiratory infections. And they've been designed in some ways to mitigate that risk, but particularly high-risk parts of the hospital, like emergency rooms, and then also areas where the staff or the public are lingering. What do you think there, places that don't have negative pressure rooms, but other higher-risk parts of the hospital, what should they be thinking about or prioritizing?
Yeah, I mean, in the UK, we don't have centralized recirculation systems, but there are a number of local sort of split AC systems within those spaces. And I think this is where UV starts to creep into these types of environments. I don't think you need a 99.99% single pass reduction in an office. I think that's excessive. But when you start talking about hospital environments with unknown bugs of various different origins going around in that space, I think that's where UV starts to play a role. I like the concept of upper room UV. I think it's a relatively new technology, but the fact that you can get that you're not using, I mentioned earlier on about noise, energy use, and a lot of fans blowing air around. If you're using natural circulation within the space to move that air through the UV field, I think that could be the best way of deploying the UV technology. So, for those types of environments, I think we should be looking at that.
Okay. And finally, to just mention an environment that you mentioned yourself earlier, plants and food processing plants are places where you have often kind of working people in an environment where there's high rates of recirculation, but also the spaces generally have higher air volumes and so forth. What do you think is appropriate there to mitigate risk?
So in those types of spaces, you're generally using much higher recirculation systems, so 90% plus levels of recirculation. You're dealing with a lot of pathogens within that space. So again, this is potentially where a UV technology creeps into play. I think if there's also a level of particulate pollution in the space as well, combining UV and the bipolar ionization, both of those would be useful. A lot of these spaces, they do have very high grades of filtration that are leaving the air anyway, so they're quite high spec systems. So that's like a high care food area. But then you have a lot of spaces which just have a coolers just blowing out into the spaces. There's a possibility that you could deploy upper room UV in those types of environments, but either that or bipolar ionization in those types of environments. You can't put a filter on a cooler. It's the wrong type of fan to take that.
All right, great. Well, great job. So moving on, which indoor air quality technologies are emerging or have recently emerged that get you most excited these days, and why?
Not too many new technologies. There's a lot of older technologies with new names coming out there. A lot of rebranding of older technologies, or people saying, "Oh, ours is slightly different. It's not that. It's this." But yeah, on a positive note, there's one cool technology which I've only just recently started to get my head around, which is a catalyst technology that comes out of Oxford University. That's very interesting. Catalyst applied to a carrier like a carbon activated carbon filter has been shown a lot to break down lots of pollutants, including formaldehyde, really effectively, and for a long period of time. Because a lot of these air cleaning technologies, you've either got lots of consumables, or they get saturated very quickly, or they use lots of energy. This DNO catalyst is promising in a lot of ways. The people who are doing it, I'm really encouraging them to try and get it introduced into HVAC systems. At the moment, you can get it in a standalone filter. But if that could be deployed into general HVAC, I think that would be very interesting, because it gets rid of a multitude of pollutants within the space, and has been shown to destroy viruses as well. So very interesting for just a material based catalyst. But I think some of the most exciting advancements are around sensors and data and what we do with that. And that's what I'd really like to see come out of the pandemic, and where we talk about total air quality again. The question about what is the best air that we should be providing to this building right now? Is it indoor air? Is it outdoor air? In what proportions? What risk is there if we are adjusting the percentages that we're putting into that space? bringing AI into it as well to learn how that building performs, and even to learn how the occupants perform under different levels of air quality. I think that's probably the most exciting technology that's out there for at the moment.
So, focusing on one technology in particular that has gotten a big boost from the pandemic, but not without controversy, bipolar ionization. What is your assessment of bipolar ionization as a technology for indoor air quality generally, and then specifically for pathogens? And just share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, there has been a lot of attention and a lot of controversy around the technology, with a lot of claims about mis-selling of it. And I can see how it happens. Like this is a technology that we work with, and dentists in this country, they got a lot of guidance very early, and they were told that they had to provide, I think from memory, it was 10 air changes an hour within their dental surgeries. A lot of these dental surgeries are in very old buildings. They don't have mechanical ventilation. They don't have any ventilation. They could probably open the window if they took the paint off and opened it up again. But generally, very high risk environments, lots of nasty chemicals they use, particulates. It was a nasty environment before COVID, and now you've got this very high level of aerosol generation. And I've got a dentist on the phone saying, "Oh, I've got an air conditioning unit. Can I put a bipolar ionization unit in there?" I'm like, no, you are in an incredibly high risk environment. Putting a small bipolar ionization unit in that device is not going to deal with this very high aerosol risk that you've got within that space. It's the wrong solution. But I bet a lot of people would take that order. Yep. It kills 99.99%. It's been, it kills 99.99% COVID. So I think a lot of problems arise because of the sheer number of people who've come into the market promoting products. 2 years ago, there were maybe half a dozen people really talking about indoor air quality in the UK. And now that's all you hear. I'm not sure if it's echo chamber from my LinkedIn, but that's all we seem to hear about air quality at the moment. I think the bipolar ionization is a really good solution for offering, I would say, a low level of protection against airborne viruses. You're not getting, despite the fact that you might see 99.99% on an ionizer system, it's not going to be the same as passing it through a HEPA. You're not getting that single pass efficacy. There's lots of testing showing really good promise for ionization systems. It's just so difficult to test them because it's not like a filter. With a filter, you've got clean air. Sorry, you've got dirty air on one side and you clean air on the other side. Ionization systems, or any system that relies on creating something which then cleans the air afterwards, the action happens in the space. So it's much more difficult to demonstrate that it works. Leeds University have done a lot of testing on ionization going back a period of time, and they got some very good results for bacteria. A lot of Japanese and Korean companies have done a lot of testing on ionization and variations of that, and they've seen very good results. I think one of the other problems is that it's treated like a tick box exercise. Oh, I've got an HVAC system. I fitted a bipolar ionization system. People who've been working with these, there's a company called Tyra in Spain. They've been working with ionization systems for a couple of decades, so they can make those systems work really well, and they know how to use them. But a lot of companies are just treating it like a tick box exercise. They're selling something that's got 99% COVID reduction rate, but it's potentially going into the wrong systems. And this is bipolar ionization. This is a lot of technologies out there. There are a lot of people who are new to these technologies, and people are putting their trust in them, that they know what they're talking about. So, when you're dealing with a company, look at how long they've been doing these technologies, or just been in this industry. And if they set their business up just before Christmas, you probably shouldn't be dealing with them.
All right. So, looking ahead, what lasting impacts do you see coming from the pandemic as it relates to indoor air quality? Is it going to change the level of prioritization of this important topic? Is it going to change building design? Is it going to change HVAC systems? Or are we just is this going to be kind of flash in the pan and then we're going back to the pre-pandemic world?
We're already seeing changes in HVAC design now. These are coming through. So I think some of these, so say some buildings that were coming through the pipeline, they might have had local sort of fan core units, so that they're offering local recirculation. Those were initially seen as a risk. Later, that was revised by SAGE, which is like UK government scientist advice, and I know a couple of people on that are involved in that. They said that as long as your air change rates are high enough, then the risk from those types of systems is acceptable. But we may see less mixing ventilation systems and more directional control of the air within the space, as I mentioned before, maybe introducing the air at low level, exhausting it at high level, etc., rather than everything at high level, all mixing together. So we're seeing that in design. Whether we can get humidity added into buildings, from the work I've done with Aerated, it's very challenging to get it past building services engineers who, all they ever says is all we've ever done is take humidification systems out. So to try and get them in, I think that needs to be led by industry, by the humidity control industry. So aside from HVAC design, a lot of questions are going to be asked from people occupying buildings. They're going to want to know what the buildings are like that they are going to be in. They're going to be more aware of it. They may have IAQ sensors on their phone that know what spaces are like. They may have them hung around their neck. They're going to want to know that their buildings are healthy. So there's going to be a big short-term drive for people to demonstrate that their buildings are healthy. But I think it's here to stay. I mean, if you look at, I don't know if you can go back into, I don't remember what the Google Trends, that's what it's called. If you probably trended indoor air quality, you could see it rise before the pandemic. It was the topic. Energy was the big topic. Then it moved to indoor air quality. And now the newspapers are maybe slightly less interested in the coronavirus pandemic. And we're all about, look at all these fires, look at all this heat. So I think coming out of this, it's going to be sustainability and air quality together, certainly from a building services engineer perspective.
So love to hear from our guests on their information diet and how they're staying on top of the pulse of the market, how you're challenging your thinking, how you're spurring new ideas. So to this effect, what are you reading, listening to on a regular basis? Who are you speaking with? Whose opinion do you really respect? How are you staying kind of at the bleeding edge of what's going on?
It's tough at the moment. There's so much coming out there. There's a lot of legislation to chew through. In terms of books and things out there, books on indoor air quality, there's not a huge amount there. Francesca Brady owes me a copy of Healthy Buildings. She's told me she's going to send me Joseph Allen's book, so I haven't got it yet. She missed my birthday, so it must be coming at Christmas. So I should be getting a copy of that. But I do. I'm on LinkedIn a lot. I listen to a lot of people who are on there and try and read their research. And a couple of people that are publishing research. Powell Wargocki. So he's based in Denmark, has been working in the built environment and done a lot of work with air qualities like the European Joseph Allen. He's definitely worth keeping an eye on his work. Dr. Prashant Kumar, he's based at Surrey University. He does a lot of work on air quality. A lot of it is on outdoor air quality, but indoor air quality as well. One of the people that really inspired me to try and be more enthusiastic about my craft, Dr. Sean Fitzgerald, soon to be Sir Sean Fitzgerald. So he's involved with SAGE. He was the founder of Breathing Buildings. And also check out Nathan Wood. He's good fun. He's heavily involved with Visa in the UK, and also with links in Europe as well. So a lot of what I get comes from LinkedIn. So it's difficult to sift through that, but definitely recommend checking out those guys.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. I want to give you the floor to close with any parting thoughts for the audience.
Yeah, thank you. We've got a lot to deal with. I never had so many people interested in what my job was. Air conditioning is what people thought I always did. But it's not, it's air quality and ventilation. But we've got a big challenge, and we need to get it right. And it's not just short-term solutions that we need. We need long-term solutions that deliver healthy buildings for people, healthy, productive buildings. But we really need to keep an eye on energy use as well, because that really is a big problem looming in the wings. So let's not have air quality and sustainability fighting each other. Let's think about them from the beginning and deliver some good buildings.
Great. Well, really important closing point there. Definitely on the top of our minds as well. So thanks so much. Great discussion. Really appreciate your time and sharing your perspective, and all the best moving forward.
Thanks, Eric.